Hi, welcome to my channel if you're new, welcome back if you're a subscriber. Today I'm going to be doing my January and February wrap up, which I'm really excited about. I have some books that I just can't wait to talk to you about. I hope you all had a wonderful past 2 reading months. The past 2 months for me just personally have been a little bit up and down, but reading wise, they have been up and down as well, I will say. I'm going to format this video a little bit differently than I usually do, so I'm going to be going through the books in order that I read them in, and then at the very end of the video, I'm going to give you my top recommendations from the past 2 months that I've read. So everything will be timestamped below, but I really hope you stick around for the whole video. And let's just get into the video. All right, so I have some statistics pulled up on my computer right here. So I read 14 books total in the past 2 months. I actually read 7 books per month, and both months I read 5 through audiobook and 2 physically. So I didn't even try to do that, but they just happened to be the same, so that's kind of cool. For my genres, I read all of these that are shown above, but I'll read them out. So thriller, horror, mystery, young adult, science fiction, LGBTQIA+, crime, and contemporary. So, you know, these are kind of loose categories. They're story graph categories, so sometimes I agree with what they're put in and sometimes I don't. And then my average star rating according to this chart is 3.39 stars. So it's okay, it's not horrible, but it's all right. It's kind of middle of the road. I didn't really read any 5-star reads this month. I do have one that is pretty darn close to a 5-star read, but as you can see on here, you know, I predominantly read 4 stars, which is pretty good. And then unfortunately, I had quite a few lower ratings. So yeah, that's how it was this past month. But once again, I have some real gems in here that I can't wait to talk about. I also participated in 2 different readathons. So in January, I participated in Winterween, which is a readathon hosted by Gabby and Olivia. Gabby from Gabby Reads and Olivia from Olivia Reads a Latte. They are both queens and I love them so much. So I participated in that readathon. I actually vlogged it, so I will link my vlogs above. I really go into detail with my thoughts on the books I read for that. And then I participated in Blackathon. So Blackathon is hosted by Jessie, and Jessie is an amazing creator here on YouTube, and their channel is Bowties and Books. And this readathon was created to celebrate Black creators. And this year, so many amazing creators participated in the readathon. All of their information will be below. But I participated in the thriller, horror, mystery category, of course, and this one was hosted by Jessie and also Nina from The Wandering Reader on Bookstagram, which I love Nina's content so much. She has so many good resources for horror content, so I highly recommend subscribing to all of these creators that I just mentioned, and also, of course, following Nina on Instagram. So the first book of the year I read is The Shuddering by Ania Ahlborn, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. And actually, this one was the one that is honestly almost a 5-star read. It could very well be a 5-star read, but something is just holding me back a little bit from making it a 5-star read. I don't know how to explain it. Sometimes I just get this feeling when I read a 5-star book, and I think it's because of the ending. The ending was so chilling, but the ending made me so sad that I wanted it to end a different way. So that's why it's a 4.5-star read for me. But I fulfilled the prompts of reading a book with a winter setting, reading a book that will give you thrills and chills, and also reading a book with snow on the cover. So those were the Winterween prompts I completed with this book. So this is about 5 characters, and they go to this vacation isolated cabin, and they're all there reconnecting, and basically it's the last hurrah in this cabin because it's actually the siblings' parents' cabin and they have sold it. But soon a heavy storm comes in and they're snowed in at this cabin, and it becomes clear that there are creatures out in the woods that are watching them and want to kill them. So first of all, this is a through and through creature feature. It is so fun though. It's very in your face. You see the creatures up close and personally. Oftentimes I like with horror to not really see the creature, but it worked with this one to know what they looked like. They were really scary looking. And honestly, this really made me have the Descent vibes, which is one of my favorite horror movies with the kind of creatures that are in that movie. But like I said before, it's 5 main characters. So it's a brother and a sister, and then the brother's girlfriend, and then the sister's best friend and the brother's best friend are there. And actually the brother's best friend has a girlfriend. And this complicates things because the sister had a past relationship with this person and she's jealous of the new girlfriend, so there's a lot of tension there. And there's just a lot of tension between the characters because they all have this shared past together, and there's this new kind of outsider coming in, and this new outsider doesn't even want to be there. She's kind of complaining the whole time, and the vibes are just off. And I just love in books where a group of people are stuck together in close quarters and they have a past drama and history together and all hell breaks loose. And I definitely think that this one started like that. So it started very drama filled. I wasn't really attached to the characters, but I will say as it went on, I started really feeling for the characters. They started to feel super real and they had some emotional things in their past. There were also 2 love interests and kind of 2 love stories that I was sort of shipping, which is very strange for me. As you all know, usually I don't care about love stories in books, but I really enjoyed it in this one. And oh my gosh, as they were being picked off kind of one by these creatures, you know what's gonna happen, but once it starts happening, you're already attached to the characters, so it makes their deaths feel so significant, and I was just super emotionally invested in this one. And like I said before, the creatures are really terrifying how they're described. Also, it was really fun while I was reading this. Gabby was actually reading it as well, and we had very similar thoughts, and it was fun to discuss it with her. So yeah, I really love this one. I would highly recommend this one if you want something that is really focused on that scary winter setting. I feel like a lot of times in horror books, the winter setting is more focused on than in thriller books that take place in winter settings, because in the thriller books, it's a lot more about kind of the character dynamics and less about what's out there to get them or like the one evil character in the group. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I've learned that I generally prefer horror novels that are set in winter settings rather than thriller novels because the horror novels just really focus on the setting. Also, this really felt like an action film. It was so fast-paced and each chapter kind of begins with a separate story of a scene of just new characters and how they're encountering these creatures for the first time and kind of their murder and how the creatures killed them, and it just felt very cinematic. I feel like as soon as stories incorporate winter settings, it just transfers to film so well, and so it's just so fun to visualize these stories, and I just highly loved imagining the scenery in this one and the feel, and I could just feel the coldness and the claustrophobia and how trapped the characters were, and I just loved it so much. So anyway, I'm gonna move on to the next book that I read from the Readathon, but what a great way to start out my reading year, reading this really fun book. So for the prompt for reading a novella and reading a book in the dark, I read The Visitor by Sergio Gomez, and this has been on my list for a while. I have wanted to get to this for a long time, and I actually really wanted to read it over the Christmas season, which this readathon sort of still was in the Christmas season because it was very early on in January. This is about a group of travelers in a diner on Christmas Day, and they're all snowed in together, and so they're getting to know each other, trying to pass the time, but then the power goes out, and soon they realize that they're not alone. So this was a really fun little novella. I gave this one 3 stars, and I said this in my vlog, I'll say it again. My 3-star rating doesn't mean I didn't enjoy a book. It just either means I wanted more from the book or it was okay. And for this one, I just wanted more from the book. And I really was enjoying the story, and I just felt like it ended too soon. If you read this book, let me know if you feel the same way. But I really was enjoying it, and then it ended, and I was sad. And what I mean by I wanted more from it was I wanted more from the backstories of the characters, so I would care about them even more. I wanted to know more about their past, and I know it was a novella, so this was sort of removed from the story, but I really wanted to know more about the backstories. I thought that it was very action-filled. All the action scenes were really fun. I've never read an alien book before, so this was kind of a fun introduction to that, and I definitely want to check out more books about aliens. Also, again, it was a snowy setting around Christmas time with blood and action, and I thought that it looked very pretty in my mind when I was visualizing it, so I really enjoyed that aspect. And I really felt like this is a perfect read to read during the holiday season, and if you can, I would recommend saving it for next Christmas because, again, it takes place on Christmas Day, so what a perfect time to read. Alright, next I'm going to talk about Shiver, and I read this for Winterween as well. I had already finished all the prompts, but I really wanted to include this in my vlog. So once again, I'll link the vlogs above, so go check them out if you want more thoughts on all of these books I'm talking about. But this book is about a group of old friends who all knew each other from the peak of their snowboarding career. But they get these email invites inviting them to a reunion, and they all decide to go to it and kind of reconnect with one another. So this reunion is taking place on the top of a mountain in a ski resort, and as they're going up the lift, they all realize that they don't really know who sent them the email invites, and it soon becomes clear that whoever invited them either is in the group and is lying about inviting them, or is someone outside of the group. And they get to the top of the lift, no one is there, it all feels very off and weird, and something is just wrong. There's a sense of dread. And so they start playing this icebreaker game, and it starts, totally fine, but then it starts taking a sinister and kind of cruel even turn, and this is when they really start to fear for their lives. So they're snowed in at this resort because, of course, in books like this, they're always snowed in, which I love, and they all have this past history, and we know that someone has died, and everybody in this group is sort of a suspect. So I gave this one 4 stars, and this one was a little bit of a weird read for me because it started off super strong, then it dipped for a few hundred pages, and then it went back up in my enjoyment, and I really loved the end, and especially the last sentence. What I really loved about it was the setting. I love the isolated resort. I love the feeling of claustrophobia and being snowed in and having, however, the snowboarding talk, it really got to me because personally, I just wasn't interested. It just went on and on and on. It was talking about their snowboarding careers in great detail. And I know this is something that a lot of people have problems with this book, and I agree. I really didn't care about the snowboard talk. It's okay if it's in there a little bit, but it was just really overdone in my opinion. However, once the action started picking up, I was like, why couldn't we have just skipped through some of that, couple hundred pages in the middle and gone right to this, because it was super riveting once the real action was happening. Also, something that's interesting is usually in books where it's a group of characters and you hear about them in the past, I'm usually more interested in the chapters that take place in the past, but in this one I was much more interested in the present chapters. And so, like I said, it just felt like the past chapters really were dragging on for a long time and that there wasn't any suspense, which I just didn't like. So if you're okay with it being a little bit of a slow kind of middle and a lull in the book, or if you don't mind snowboarding talk, then I highly recommend checking this one out because I do think the payoff is worth it. And I would really recommend reading this through audiobook. I did it that way, and that's how I was kind of able to get through that middle section. But that is why I only gave it 4 stars. I honestly probably would have given it 3.5 stars, but the ending really bumped it up to a 4 because I thought the ending was really chilling and I loved how it all tied together. It was awesome. The end, oh, it's so good. Like, when I think about the very end, I'm super impressed by this novel. It's just that middle, it just needed to be shorter in my opinion. All right. I have to compose myself for this next one because I hate complaining about books. I really don't enjoy talking about books I hate. It doesn't bring me joy. It doesn't make me feel good because I know an author spent so much time writing this, so much energy, put so much love into a book, but I just can't stand this next book I'm about to talk to, and that rarely happens. I usually don't read books that I just straight up cannot stand. This next one I can't stand, and I feel so mean, but I just cannot stand this next one. So, Dark Things I Adore by Katie Latari. I have a lot of thoughts for this one. So this is a debut novel, so maybe that's why it was a little clunky, but I'm gonna go into the synopsis first. So in 1988, a group of outcasts gather together at an arts camp, and they're all talented and ambitious artists. And they share dark secrets, and these truths come back to haunt them. In 2018, an esteemed arts professor, Max, goes to his protege's remote home to view her graduate thesis collection, and he thinks there's sort of a bit of a romantic spark between them, so he's very excited to go visit her. However, little does he know she planned this weekend for revenge, because she knows what happened in the summer of 1988 and his dark secrets, and she is determined to make him pay. So I read this synopsis and I was so excited because I love revenge novels. It seemed like it would have a touch of dark academia, which I really like. I usually like when, painting is involved in books, and, a arts camp in the woods, it just sounded like such a good remote setting. Everything about this just had such a potential, and it just fell so short. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm so sad about it. Because again, I was so excited for this synopsis after I read it, and B, it was so long. This book is so long. It's one of the longest books I've read this year. I can't remember how many pages it is. I want to say it's like 500 pages. And for a thriller, I just think that's way too excessive. I think so much of this could have been cut out. There was literally a sentence that was a whole paragraph. How does that happen? I'm just confused. Like, how does that not get cut out in the editing process? So first of all, it was just filled with so much artistic jargon, and it just went over my head. So obviously I just wasn't the target audience for this. It was obvious the author really knew what she was talking about painting and all these artistic terms, but they just went on and on and on, and I had no idea what they meant. I thought it would be so cool if the author kind of included illustrations maybe, or clips of the character's thesis, because then we could visually see them. But like I said, they were just described, and the way they were described was with so many different artistic jargon that I don't know, I don't understand. So I couldn't visualize any of the art pieces. And also, I guessed the twist and the direction of the story like 100 pages in, which generally doesn't happen. And so when things were revealed and revealed and revealed, and it was supposed to be like this big revelation for the reader, I just knew what was going on the whole time, and it had no impact on me. And I read the reviews, and it seems like this book is so divisive. People either love it or they hate it, and I just fell in the camp of hating this book. I left a 1-star review, and I was like, I don't even want to write a review because I just will feel frustrated and angry, so I'm not going to write a review, but I gave it 1 star, and I should have DNF'd it, and this is just my lesson that I really need to DNF something if I'm not enjoying it, 100 or 200 pages in. I just need to DNF it, especially if it's a long book, because this put me in the biggest reading slump, and I just could not get out of the reading slump after. I didn't want to read. I felt like I'd wasted so many hours of my life on this book. And another thing was, it was so sad. This book was so sad. It dealt with mental illness and abuse and all of these things, and there was no redeeming quality at the end where it was like, I read all of this and I feel good about it at the end because there was awesome revenge. When the revenge happened, it was not effective, and I don't know how to explain this. Like, it was not a good payoff. It was just sad, and I knew what was going on the whole time, and I was just watching this person be abused over and over and over and over. I knew what was going on. It was just so sad to read about. There were so many POVs, and it was trying to confuse the reader, but again, I thought it was just super obvious what was going on the whole time. And again, I just wasn't rooting for any of the characters. I was just sad about the situation that was happening. And it just felt really wordy and pretentious, and I felt like the writing was trying to be artistic, but there's a way to write in a lyrical way that's not overly wordy and still is this beautiful kind of writing, and this just wasn't it. All right, so the next book I'm going to talk about is Where They Found Her by Kimberly McCreight, and this was actually the Book Troop book club pick for January, and I will link the live show below. I was Gabby's co-host for that month, and it was just such a blast getting to read with her and discuss this book with everybody in the live show, and it was so much fun. She was also the co-host for my book book club in January, and we read The Maid together by Nita Prose, and it was just such a fun month collaborating with Gabby. But anyway, let's talk about this one and my feelings about it. Where They Found Her is about a freelance journalist named Molly who is called in to cover a story about a baby who has been found dead, and she tries to figure out what has happened and who the mother is. So I gave this one a 3.5 star rating. I was trying to decide if I should give it a 3-star or 3.5 stars, and I settled on a 3.5 star rating because I did enjoy this book. But I think the main problem I had with it was that it was trying to do too many things. So there were too many POVs in this. It made it kind of convoluted to read about and confusing. I literally had to make a character web, which I never really do. I mean, sometimes I jot down characters' names, but throughout the book, it kind of took me out of the story because I was, I would hear a name and then I would have to look at my character chart and see how this person related to everybody else. So if you're somebody who wants to sort of play detective and really enjoys that kind of thing, I would really recommend this novel because you really do have to kind of piece everything together and look and see how everyone might be involved. But for me, that just sort of took me out of the story. So when, shocking things were happening, it wasn't as shocking to me because I didn't feel like I really fully knew all the characters very well, if that makes sense. I felt like this book also just had so many different storylines happening at once. And so I felt like if it had been chopped down to just 1 or 2 things, it would have made a lot more sense. But there were just so many different things that it was trying to do. So again, I just felt like it was a little bit convoluted. That being said though, I really still did enjoy this book and I wasn't bored. I was really engaged throughout the novel. And this book went way darker than I thought it would. I mean, it deals with a dead baby and that, in the beginning, it's this reporter trying to figure out what happened to this dead baby. But please look at the trigger warnings for this one because, like I said, it does deal with very heavy subject matter. But I really did enjoy listening to this one on audiobook, and I specifically really enjoyed discussing this one with everyone. I thought there was so much to discuss in this one because so much goes on in the book. And I was really surprised by some of the twists, and then other ones I wasn't as surprised by. So then the next book is The Maid by Nita Prose, and I read this for my book club, the Lights Out Book Club, and I had Gabby from Gabby Reads on as my co-host, and I had such a fun time reading this book with her and discussing it with her and everybody else. And I gave this one 4 stars. So this one is about Molly, who is a maid at a luxurious hotel, and she really has a passion for cleaning. She absolutely loves it. She struggles with social skills and oftentimes misinterprets the intentions of others. One day she enters the suite of the infamous Charles Black and finds him dead in his bed, and she's shocked, but she actually becomes a suspect for the case because of her social skills. She didn't commit the crime though, and so she has to try to figure out who committed this crime. So it sort of has this locked room mystery vibe, which I really enjoyed. And this one reads a lot more like a cozy mystery. It doesn't read like a thriller. The goal of this book is not to be thrilling and twisty, but rather to learn about Molly and hear from her perspective and try to piece together as she pieces it together what's going on around her. And because she struggles with interpreting social situations, you're sort of confused along with her, but oftentimes you know what's going on, but she's confused by what's going on. So I really enjoyed this book. I just loved Molly's character. She's just such an endearing character, and also throughout this novel, it was really sad at parts, which I wasn't expecting. So her grandmother has recently passed away from cancer, and she was super close to her grandmother, and her grandmother helped her interpret the world. So she's dealing with this grief of her grandmother, and she's also just navigating through relationships with different people at the hotel. So some of the plot points you sort of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit for, and I know this bothered some people. It didn't really bother me personally because I just really enjoyed the reading experience of this one. And actually the twist at the end was surprising. So I know I said it wasn't like a thrilling book, but it was surprising at the end. It caught me off guard. Also, I felt like this one was a really fast-paced read. So I read this through audiobook and I really enjoyed the narration. And also this is being made into a movie, and Molly is going to be played by Florence Pugh, which is so exciting. I think Florence Pugh is such an amazing amazing actor, and also her being chosen as Molly just makes perfect sense. So I knew about this casting choice as I was reading the book, so I imagined Molly as Florence the whole time, and it really enhanced my reading experience because I love Florence Pugh so much. So then next I read This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno, and I gave it 2 stars. So this is about a man who loses his wife and he's dealing with his grief throughout the novel. And this one actually touched on a lot of different horror kind of subgenres. So at first it was more of a calm, quiet horror novel. Then it became a little supernatural. And then by the end, it sort of transitioned into more of a cosmic horror. So it covered a lot of different subgenres within this novella. I mean, it's quite a short book, so I was really surprised to see how it went from the beginning to the end. I honestly don't know how it got there at the end. But I rated this 2 stars because for me, I wanted it to be more like the synopsis. So in the synopsis, it talks about how there's a haunted Alexa or a haunted smart speaker. And I wanted those creepy, like bump in the night kind of vibes. And I just didn't get that from this. It really went a different place. It handled grief very well though. I think that was my favorite part of this book. Just reading about how he is grieving his wife and how he is going through all of that and processing everything. And I also really liked hearing about his good memories with his wife. And I really loved the beginning, and the writing style immediately sucked me in. But I just was so disappointed when it went such a different direction from the synopsis. And also, I just have quickly learned that cosmic horror just doesn't work for me. It kind of goes over my head, and I just did not enjoy the ending because I was super lost, and I just thought it just went way out there, which I know some people really, really love, and actually was something that people specifically really loved about this book. But for me personally, I just didn't like that. So I gave it 2 stars, but I know that objectively this was a very well written novel that a lot of people could appreciate. And I feel like if you're someone who likes Stephen King's writing, I would really check this one out because it sort of gave me Stephen King vibes throughout. And like I said, it really dips into many different subgenres of horror. So like I said, it starts with psychological horror, then sort of a little bit of supernatural horror, and then cosmic horror, and mixes that all together. Let's move on to my February reads. Oh, and the first book I read, how do I even talk about this book? So I read Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez, and I gave it 4 stars. And first of all, this book is a very difficult book to A, talk about, and B, it was very difficult for me to pick a star rating for this book. So this is about a couple who decide to go on a romantic getaway, and the wife is really excited to tell her husband on this trip that she's pregnant because they've been trying for a long time, but her husband is arrested and she ends up getting kidnapped. And she's kidnapped, and the kidnapper basically wants her to star in a snuff film. So I knew that going into this, it would be an extreme horror novel, and I've actually never really read an extreme horror novel, but I was so intrigued because I kept hearing people talk about how, you know, this was just so surprising and such a well-written novel, and that it just really went there. But I wish I would have read the trigger warnings for this one because this one is so disturbing. I have never been so disturbed by a book before. And there is a specific scene that I know a lot of people read and they DNF this book because they just can't keep reading past it. And for me, I kept reading because the overarching book had a very, very, very interesting storyline that I really, really wanted to know what happened in. And a lot of the book actually sort of felt like a Criminal Minds episode to me, minus of course like the fun characters in Criminal Minds that you get, but it really had that sort of vibe. But then it just had these extreme, brutal, just horror pages that were so hard for me to get through in certain circumstances because of how, I don't know how to say this, but because of the trigger warnings in those specific scenes that are just so difficult to read about. So I would say if this is something that you're interested in, I just really want to say, please read the trigger warnings. Please, 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 please read the trigger warnings. And if you read them and you feel like you can read it and you start the first chapter and you're like, oh my gosh, this is too much for me, I would stop there because the first chapter really goes there. But if you think the first chapter is bad, the stuff later on is way, way, way harder to read. So I gave this one 4 stars because it was very well written, but I just thought it went a little bit overboard in the specific scenes. And it was just so shocking what this person did to escape her situation. That was just, it was a lot. It was a lot, folks. Alright, so then I moved into my books that I read for the Blackathon, Readathon, and like I said earlier, I joined the thriller horror mystery team. So the prompts for that one were read a book that explores the duality of vengeance and justice, a book with mental health, physical health, or neurodivergent representation, a book with an adjective in the title, and then the group book, which was The Perfect Ruin by Shanora Williams. So I read Allegedly by Tiffany G. Jackson for the mental health representation. And this one is about Mary, who is a Black teenager. And when she was just 9 years old, she was convicted of murdering a white baby and went to jail. So this takes place in the present time now, and basically you're hearing everything through Mary's perspective, and she's pregnant now, and she really, really wants to be able to start a new life for herself. And she's living in this group home, and she's just in these horrible conditions, and has just faced so much injustice. And so this book is so sad. It's so hard to read. It was very emotional reading. I will say Mary's character was fascinating to me. Something about Tiffany D. Jackson's writing is just so easily bingeable. And I listened to this on audiobook, so I really flew through this book very, very fast. This one though didn't really feel like a thriller for the majority of the book. I will say the ending was very, very unexpected, and this is kind of what made it a thriller, just the twist at the end. I was shocked. And this book was just a lot darker and grittier than I thought going into it. And again, I just really enjoy Tiffany D. Jackson's writing style. I've read 3 books by her so far, and I want to keep reading her books. And then I read The Perfect Ruin by Shanora Williams, and I gave this 3 stars. And this was the group read, but it also covered the other prompts as well. So Ivy's life was ruined years before, and she has been seeing a therapist for years to cope with what happened in her past. One day though, her therapist receives the name of the woman who ruined her life, and she lets Ivy know that she was given this name, and gives Ivy the choice to either look at the name on the note or move on and just try to keep healing. And the therapist highly recommends, don't look at the note. You've made so much progress. You're just gonna regress if you know who did this to you. But Ivy says, no, I wanna read the note. I have to know. She ruined my life, and I need to know who ruined my life. So she finds out that Lola ruined her life years ago. And Lola is this extremely rich, wealthy woman who's married to this perfect plastic surgeon husband and lives in this mansion. So Ivy decides she's now going to ruin Lola's life. So she infiltrates her elite circle of friends and works her way into her life. She joins her charity and tries to steal her husband, but soon her plans start unraveling. So this had a super strong beginning. I really loved it for 50% of the book. I thought this may be an all-time favorite for me, but it sort of took a different turn, and I can't say the turn it took without giving it away, unfortunately, but it took a different turn, and once it switched POVs, I didn't like it as much. And I didn't really feel attached to the main character, which is super important to really feel attached to the main character for me in revenge novels, and I just didn't feel that sort of passionate attachment and need for revenge for the main character in this, because basically everybody in this is a horrible person who's done horrible things, and so it's just so many unlikable characters doing despicable things. I think a lot of people would really, really love this novel though, because it's super twisty, and if you like rich sort of gossip and drama, I would highly recommend this one for you. And even though the plot twist didn't work for me, I think it will work for a lot of people. So I still highly recommend checking out this novel if any of what I just said sounds interesting to you. Alright, the next book I'm going to talk about is Cherish, Farrah, and this is by Bethany C. Morrow, and I gave this one 2 stars. And I was actually given an arc of this one, so I read it a little bit before it came out. And this one is about 17-year-old Farrah, and she is one of the 2 Black girls in her country club community. Her best friend is Black and has adoptive parents who are extremely wealthy and really spoil her. When her family is unexpectedly confronted with a foreclosure though, Farrah is determined to reassert control over her life and moves in with her best friend Cherish, the only person she loves even when she hates her. So she manipulates herself further and further into this family, but soon things start to feel off and she starts to feel really, really not in control anymore. And things start happening in the household that are very strange. So she starts to fall really ill though, and things just start seeming really suspicious. There's a ton of tension with her best friend's boyfriend, and she finds a mysterious journal that keeps track of what's happening with Farrah. And she starts to wonder who really is in control of her life. So this novel reads a lot like an A24 film. If you've seen the films, you know what I mean. They're extremely divisive, so oftentimes I'll either love an A24 film or I'll hate an A24 film. And for this one just didn't work for me. So the whole time you have no idea what's going on, but you know something really dark is happening. You're hearing everything through the main character's perspective, and oftentimes I found myself just really confused while I was reading. And it felt like a very artistically done book and sort of almost like a fever dream as I was reading. This one was also a very, very slow burn, and I kept reading because I really wanted to know what was going to happen, and I was waiting for this huge payoff at the end, but it just didn't really work for me. I don't know why it didn't, because I know a lot of people enjoy this novel, and the thing I really did like about this novel was the social commentary. I think it was just the narration style and the way that it was just so fever dreamy, and that I didn't know at all what was going on, and I was just really confused the whole time, was why I just didn't really enjoy my experience reading it. I will say this novel is really good at setting this unsettling atmosphere where you can't quite place what's wrong, but something is very wrong. And this is something, like I said, that A24 really loves doing in their movies. And this one I could really see playing out well in a film. All right, let's move on to Cirque Berserk. And I gave this one 4.5 stars, and this one is by Jessica Guess. I freaking love this novel. I can't wait to talk to you all about this one. The summer of 1989, there was a massacre at a local carnival where a group of teens killed 12 people and then disappeared. So 30 years later, a group of seniors learn about this urban legend, and they decide to visit the carnival to see if what they heard is actually true. And so the carnival is actually not open anymore, so they have to break into it. And once they arrive, they end up fighting for their lives. So this one was so much fun. If you want a vintage slasher feeling horror novel taking place at a creepy carnival, this one is going to be right up your alley. This one had so many retro horror vibes, which I really, really loved. And the atmosphere in this one was just such a fun time. You get to learn a little bit about the villain's backstory, which was also really cool. And I love the incorporation of 80s music throughout this novel. And there was a lot of fun gore in this, and it was just such a visually stunning novel. And also this one is so short, so it's perfect to read in one sitting. The next one I'm so excited to talk about. I got an ARC of it, and it is My Dearest, Darkest by Kayla Cottingham. And I gave this one 4.5 stars. This is about Finch, who transfers to a competitive academy for girls, and she's an extraordinarily talented pianist. Before she transferred to the academy, though, a tragedy occurred, and her parents ended up dying in this car crash, and she was actually with them, and it's a miracle that she survived. Finch and a group of girls at the academy one night end up summoning a creature by accident, who promises to grant them all of their wishes, but they have to pay a price for it. At first, the creature seems to want to help, but soon it becomes obvious that she has sinister intentions, and her requests from the girls become increasingly more disturbing. I absolutely loved reading this book, and it had some tropes that I love in books. So it was dark academia, and it also had horror in it, which I loved. There's just something magical about reading about these gothic campuses, and it just sets such a good tone for horror and thriller novels. And actually, something that was really, really cool was a few of the characters actually lived in this lighthouse. So, oh my gosh, the setting was just so good. A gothic campus and a lighthouse. What more could we need? This also is not only a horror novel, but it's also a sapphic love story, which I usually do not like love stories. I keep saying this and then finding exceptions to the rule, but I really, really enjoy that element of this book. And the romance is just done in a certain way that I was really invested in these characters. The horror imagery in this also was super haunting, and the ending was extraordinarily intense. And like I said before, just the imagery in this was so beautiful. This novel had a little bit of a slow start, but I really think it's worth the slow burn and the payoff. So I highly recommend this to anybody who enjoys academic atmospheres, appreciates lyrical writing, and loves a horror novel with romantic elements. The last book I'm going to talk about is my Lights Out book club pick for the month of February, and it was Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. And my co-host was my friend Katrina from Katrina Brown here on YouTube. This is about a space crew who discover a legendary luxury space liner that has been missing for the past 20 years. A salvage claim could set them all up for life, and so they decide to go into the spacecraft and explore. Once they enter it though, they start to suspect that it is haunted, and they start fearing for their safety. So first of all, this one was marketed as a sci-fi horror novel, but I personally felt like in tone it felt more like a sci-fi thriller novel. It wasn't really scary, and I felt like it relied more on the twists and turns of the novel and less on the horror. But I highly recommend this one for someone who wants to dip their toes into the sci-fi genre but doesn't want to be overwhelmed, because it did have those sci-fi elements, but it was very beginner friendly. So this, I think, was my first sci-fi novel. I did read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which was a sci-fi thriller, but this is one of my first sci-fi books. So I want to break this up into what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. So I gave this one 3.5 stars because there were a lot of things I really enjoyed, but there were a lot of things that I sort of was disappointed by. So what I liked about it was I thought the concept was so creative and cool, and I could definitely tell it was highly inspired by the Titanic. This also was a visually stunning novel, so my favorite parts of the book were when they first went in and were discovering the spacecraft and trying to piece together what ended up happening and why, it went missing and what happened with the people in it. And there was a specific scene that was truly haunting in this section of the book that I really enjoyed. What I didn't like though was there was a romance that really felt very just thrown in, and I didn't enjoy that about the book. I thought it sort of took away from it. I also thought it was a little bit repetitive because the horror that's happening deals with hallucinations, and personally that's just sort of a trope that I don't really like or enjoy because it is so repetitive. And I also didn't really like the direction that the book went at the halfway point. This novel had a wonderful setup though, and it is just a debut, so I'm definitely going to be checking out what this author writes. And like I said, the creative imagery and just all of that was the highlight of this book. I really enjoyed reading about this space liner that had been abandoned and what it was like and what it looked like inside. And something that was really interesting though that I thought of was this takes place like 100 years from now, and it definitely doesn't feel like it takes place in the future. It feels like maybe it takes place now in our present day, which I thought was just an interesting note. I'll link the live show below so you can hear way more detailed thoughts about it if you want. But let's get into the end section where I talk about my most suggested books from the past 2 months, and I can't wait to talk about my favorite books. So I would totally recommend The Shuddering if you want a fun creature feature that deals with a isolated winter setting, and it's a book that you actually are rooting for the characters as they're getting picked off. And then I would recommend Cirque Berserk by Jessica Guess if you want a quick retro slasher story that has a creepy carnival atmosphere. I would recommend My Dearest, Darkest by Kayla Cottingham if you want a supernatural dark academia horror book that has a slow burn sapphic romance. I would recommend Shiver by Allie Reynolds if you want a whodunit mystery that takes place in an isolated setting that has flashbacks to the drama of what happened at the peaks of their snowboarding careers. I would recommend Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson if you want a hard-hitting thriller that focuses on the racial injustice of our justice system, and if you want to follow a story of a pregnant teen in a group home. The next one, of course, I recommend with extreme caution. Please read the trigger warnings, but that is Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez. I would recommend this if you're really into extreme horror and a snuff film sort of plot and kidnapping is really interesting to you. And lastly, I would recommend The Maid by Nita Prose if you want a cozy locked door mystery with an endearing main character that's surprisingly emotional. So that's it for this video. If you've made it this far, please comment with a yellow heart and let me know what was the favorite book you've read in the past 2 months below. Anyway, I will talk to you all very soon, and I hope you all are having a wonderful week. Bye.